Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. ABC has pulled Jimmy Kimmel, quote, indefinitely after comments he made on Monday night relating to Charlie Kirk's assassination. Joining us now to talk about this issue and the many First Amendment questions it raises is Jeff Lewis. He is an attorney specializing in the First Amendment. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. I imagine your phone has been ringing off the hook today.
Yeah, a lot of questions come up regarding the show being suspended. Absolutely.
So let's pull back. Over earlier this week, Jimmy Kimmel said, quote, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it." That is the quote that I have seen the most that seems to be tied to this suspension. What's your take on what prompted ABC to pull Jimmy Kimmel indefinitely?
Well, the sequence of events, as far as I'm concerned, was there's an announcement by the FCC chair that they might look into content they don't like coming from people like Jimmy Kimmel. And then that seemed to send a signal that certain affiliates would be given the green light to preempt the Jimmy Kimmel program, which they did. And shortly thereafter, the ABC and Disney decided to put the Kimmel show on suspension indefinitely, obviously in response to regulatory pressure or threatened regulatory pressure from the FCC.
The FCC chair, Brendan Carr, has, in comments to the media, both to CNBC and to CNN and others, seemingly referenced public interest. And I saw the comment he made to CNBC to the effect of this wasn't comedic, it was factually inaccurate. That's why people are upset. What is important to understand about public interest and what the FCC chairman is saying here?
Well, he is right in the sense that the public airwaves are public property, and so they shouldn't be misused. But on the other hand, the First Amendment prevents the government from censoring the content of what people say. So if someone were to go on a cable channel or the ABC and say things that were criminal, that would incite a riot, those types of things, the FCC would be well within the rights to shut that down. But if it's a viewpoint that the FCC doesn't like or the Trump administration doesn't like, that's where you get into sketchy gray area in terms of violating the First Amendment.
So, did the Trump administration, did the FCC violate the First Amendment here?
It's a great question. If Jimmy Kimmel were to sue ABC or Disney regarding his firing, he would lose because, as between just him and his employer, there are no free speech rights. And stars like him usually have morals clauses saying they can't say or do anything that'll put the company in ill repute. But if you take a step back and you look at what preceded and what came after, comments by the FCC threatening regulatory action, and then afterwards the FCC seeming to applaud or approve the action and President Trump approving the action, there's great circumstantial evidence there that the government put pressure on ABC based on the content of what ABC was putting on its TV wares. That's a classic First Amendment violation.
There's also a business deal at, I don't want to say
Yeah.
the center of this, but just off center of this. Can you explain what we should know about one of ABC's largest affiliate companies and what they're trying to do?
Yeah, there is a company that I believe is the largest in the country in terms of the number of affiliates it owns, and it's trying to acquire a competitor. And to complete that acquisition, they need FCC approval. And so this is a good time to for that company to be kind to the Trump administration and gain favor.
And when things like that happen, is that a First Amendment violation? Is an affiliate saying to ABC or pulling the shows just from their own affiliate stations in violation of the First Amendment because they're trying to cozy up to the FCC, perhaps?
Not really. As a matter of constitutional law, there's nothing wrong with it. There might be other laws that are violated. It's a quid pro quo or commercial bribery or something like that. But in terms of the First Amendment, keep in mind, TV stations from ABC all the way down to the affiliates, they have a First Amendment right. They have a right to decide who they're going to put on their TVs and in people's living room, and they have the right to fire people, and that's part of their free speech rights. So you see a conflict here between ABC's free speech rights, the affiliates' free speech rights, and Jimmy Kimmel's free speech rights.
Now, Jeff, you mentioned there might be a morals clause in Jimmy Kimmel's contract with ABC that could make it hard for him to sue ABC. But does he have the power here to just go completely around his employer and sue the Trump administration or sue the government?
He could sue the government for a violation of the First Amendment. But here's the deal. The government would argue that failing ratings or economics of late night TV in general, a private employer has the ability to fire someone like Jimmy Kimmel and put on another show that might make more money. And that was the true reason or the true cause for him being fired, not any pressure from the Trump government. And so, to the extent that there was evidence that the show would have been canceled anyway, or maybe Jimmy Kimmel wouldn't have renewed his contract, that would undercut a First Amendment argument. But on the other hand, some of the comments coming after the show was suspended seem to suggest the Trump administration approves of what happened here, and that's bad news for the government.
In a First Amendment lawsuit, the comments that the administration has made would hurt their case, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, they're giving approval for what ABC and Disney did to suspend the show because of the content of what Jimmy Kimmel was saying, and that's a violation of the First Amendment.
To that point, I want to read you a quote that Trump said on Air Force One earlier today. Quote, I have read someplace that the networks were 97% against me. Again, 97% negative, and yet I won easily. I would think that maybe their license should be taken away. It will be up to Brendan Carr. Do those comments violate the First Amendment?
Those comments alone would not violate the First Amendment, but what the plan the marching orders to Carr to use the FCC in an unprecedented manner to flex regulatory authority, to put pressure on affiliates or large stations to only air content that the Trump administration finds palatable. That's troubling, and it's a violation of the First Amendment.
I want to pull back because you mentioned the economic argument, and we heard that from CBS in pulling Colbert off the air. Well, or in announcing plans that this season will be the last, I should clarify. As you kind of zoom out and look at all the actions that we have seen against high-profile media figures, publications like the New York Times, what is your grade or weather report for the state of freedom of speech and freedom of the press in America right now in 2025?
Yeah, I'm seeing an acceleration of attacks on free speech and the right of the news to report the news and for people to state their opinions online, whether it's through the courts, lawsuits, and huge settlements being paid in settlement to settle those cases, or whether you're looking at regulatory pressure. Either way, this is not the kind of thing that was happening 5, 10, 15 years ago. This is unprecedented.
So, what, as a people, as individuals, is our recourse? I've seen some people saying, like, I want to cancel ESPN, Disney, Hulu. There's some economic levers that individuals can take here if they feel so moved. But short of suing the government, what can we do?
Call your congressman and put pressure on legislatures for oversight of the FCC and what's happening here, and vote at the election at the ballot box for politicians that seem to have more respect for the First Amendment and promise to give more oversight to the executive and the First Amendment, and hope that the courts at some point, if somebody files a lawsuit, whether it's Jimmy Kimmel, Steve Colbert, or somebody else, that hopefully the courts and the judges will stand up to this blatant violation of the First Amendment.
Could the comedians form a class action lawsuit amongst themselves? There was another comment from Trump, I believe this one on social media, noting that after Colbert and Kimmel, all that's left is Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers. Are we going to find a situation where some of the top comedians in this country band together to sue the government collectively?
I don't think that's likely. Class action lawsuits are not a good fit procedurally for this type of a dispute. But here's what you could see: news organizations, print, TV, online banding together to the extent the Trump government starts pressuring them to change their stories and revoking government privileges or being punitive in some way. That's a good example of when people can group together and use that group resources to pressure the Trump government pushback.
Now, of course, it is worth noting that as we've been talking about what has happened to Jimmy Kimmel and his show, it is at this juncture only an indefinite suspension. I do not believe it is accurate to use the word fully canceled at this point, though there are arguments between the right and the left about whether or not this is cancel culture. There's one side saying this is cancel culture. There's another side saying this is suppression of speech. What is your take on that debate?
It's cancel culture. Even though they are calling it an indefinite suspension, I don't think anybody expects Kimmel to ever return, at least to ABC. It's cancel culture, 100%.
It's cancel culture 100%. So as this week continues and goes on to the next week, it sounds like I'm hearing from you is that you'd be very surprised if we see a return of Kimmel's late night show.
No, I wouldn't expect him ever to return. Whether he quits out of principle and decides he doesn't want to come back, or whether or not ABC finds another show to air as a pretext to cover up the First Amendment violation, we're not going to see him back. We'll see him again as a guest on Colbert or Seth Meyers, or maybe he'll launch a podcast.
Another podcast that would
Yeah.
be in keeping with one of the trends of
Yeah.
2025 for sure. Is there anything else that you're hearing or seeing in the aftermath of this news? Because it's really been rocking the journalist side of the media, I have to say, among my media bubbles. But what are the calls you're getting? What are the primary questions you're getting in this moment?
I'm getting a lot of questions about why, in terms of all the things Jimmy Kimmel has said over the years, it seems to be pretty inoffensive compared to some of the others. Things that he said in different circumstances and more direct attacks against Trump. There's something in the air about the death of Charlie Kirk and the sensitivities of the conservatives and the call to action by Vice President Vance on the conservatives to lash out at anybody who has a different viewpoint. It's troubling. These are troubling times.
I know there was a press conference earlier today where some members of Congress were getting questions about, well, isn't this the same as what the Biden administration did, censoring information or disinformation about COVID? As you look at past presidencies, Jeff, are there any comparable situations?
Well, look, anytime the government is pressuring TV or a platform form like Facebook or Twitter or X to modulate content to only have one viewpoint as opposed to another viewpoint, it raises First Amendment issues. Now, the question for the Biden government is were there national security or overriding health concerns that justified its actions? And would those justifications give a defense to the government if sued? That's entirely different than what happened here. There was no national emergency or other countervailing interest that would justify the blatant content-based punitive action taken against Kimmel indirectly by the Trump government.
A blatant content-based punitive action against Jimmy Kimmel. That sounds like a First Amendment violation, if I'm interpreting those words correctly.
Yeah, Jimmy Kimmel's got great cause to sue the government right now for a violation of the First Amendment. The question is, will he, and how long will the case last? And will he have a judge assigned to his case that will stand up for all Americans and the right of free speech?
Jeff Lewis, attorney specializing in the First Amendment, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.